Broken, useless, a burden. Those words echo in a child's memory as 200 elite guests raise champagne glasses in the glittering Harrington ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across designer gowns and gleaming marble. At the center stands Veronica Crane, radiant, untouchable, the billionaire's perfect fiancée. But near the towering display screen, a 7-year-old girl stands frozen, trembling hands clutching a tablet against her chest. Lily Harrington hasn't spoken a single word in 2 years. Tonight, she doesn't need to. Near the service entrance, a weathered gardener in dirt-stained clothes watches the scene unfold, his calloused hands clenched tight, his eyes burning far too bright for hired help. The screen flickers to life. Veronica's confident smile cracks. What devastating secret did this silent child capture on that device? And why does a lowly gardener look like a man about to tear this glittering world apart? What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The grand ballroom of the Harrington mansion glittered under crystal chandeliers. 200 elite guests clinking champagne glasses in celebration. But in the corner of that opulent space, a 7-year-old girl stood frozen before a massive display screen, her small hands trembling around a tablet. Lily Harrington hadn't spoken a single word in 2 years, not since the night her mother died. Yet now, as her father's glamorous fiancée worked the crowd in a designer gown, this silent child was about to find her voice in the most devastating way possible. Near the service entrance, a weathered man in dirt-stained work clothes watched the screen flicker to life, his calloused hands clenched tight. His eyes held something far deeper than a servant's concern. Veronica Crane's confident smile began to falter as her own voice filled the ballroom, cold and venomous, caught forever on video. What did this silent little girl capture that would shatter everything? Stay with me, because the truth she uncovered will leave you breathless. 3 weeks earlier, the same mansion had felt like a mausoleum. Victor Harrington stood in his home office, staring at a photograph of his late wife Elena, and wondered how everything had fallen apart so completely. He'd built a billion-dollar empire in green energy, pioneered technology that powered cities, earned respect from world leaders, but he couldn't protect the two people who mattered most. Elena had died in a car accident 2 years ago on a rain-slicked highway, her vehicle plunging off a cliff when the brakes inexplicably failed. The police called it mechanical failure, a tragic coincidence. And on that same night, his daughter Lily stopped speaking entirely. The doctors called it selective mutism, a trauma response so profound that words simply vanished from her world. Into that broken household had come Veronica Crane 6 months ago, introduced by a business associate at a charity gala. She was beautiful in that polished, magazine cover way, elegant posture, perfect makeup, designer everything. She'd expressed such sympathy for his loss, such gentle concern for poor little Lily. Within weeks, she was dining at his table. Within months, she was planning their wedding. Victor's colleagues praised his choice. "You need someone strong," they said, "someone who can help you move forward." But lately, Victor had begun to notice things that didn't fit the picture Veronica painted. Small things at first: how Lily would hide behind furniture when Veronica entered a room, how the child's drawings had changed from flowers and rainbows to dark scribbles. Household staff who'd worked for him for years seemed nervous, glancing over their shoulders during conversations. A valuable antique music box that had belonged to his grandmother disappeared from the study. When he'd mentioned it to Veronica, she'd suggested smoothly that perhaps one of the maids had stolen it, that he couldn't trust help these days. Late one night, unable to sleep, Victor had confided his unease to Margaret, the elderly housekeeper who'd practically raised him after his own mother passed. She'd worked for the Harrington family for 40 years, her loyalty beyond question. Margaret had taken his hand with her weathered fingers and spoken carefully. "Mr. Victor," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that woman changes the moment your car leaves the driveway. The staff see things, and Miss Lily, That child is terrified, but she can't tell you why. That conversation had planted a seed that grew into a desperate plan. If something dark was happening in his own home, behind his back, he needed to see it with his own eyes. He needed the truth that only invisibility could reveal. And so Victor Harrington, billionaire industrialist, made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who knew him. He would disappear from his own life and return as a stranger. He would become the help, the invisible class that moved through wealthy homes like ghosts, seeing everything, heard by no one. The transformation took 3 days. Victor bought worn work boots from a thrift store, practiced callousing his hands with rough labor in a rented garage, and studied the mannerisms of the men who'd worked on his estates over the years. The humble posture, the downcast eyes, the economy of speech that came from knowing your words carried no weight. He told his executive team he was taking a 3-week trip to inspect renewable energy sites in Scandinavia, a perfectly believable cover. He had his pilot file flight plans and post photos from Oslo. And then Victor Harrington ceased to exist, replaced by Daniel Torres, a seasonal gardener from a local agency, a man with calloused hands and secrets in his eyes. Margaret introduced him to the household staff on a bright Monday morning, her performance flawless. "This is Daniel. He'll be helping with the gardens while the master is traveling." Miss Crane approved the hire. The cook nodded politely. The housemaids smiled. Veronica herself breezed through the kitchen that morning, barely glancing at the new gardener standing respectfully near the door. To her, he was furniture, part of the landscape beneath notice. She was on her phone, laughing about something, her voice bright and musical. The voice she used when she thought Victor might be listening, even from thousands of miles away. But the moment Victor's car would have reached the airport, the moment he was truly, believably gone, the music in Veronica's voice died. Victor watched it happen from the greenhouse where he was repotting orchids. Through the glass, he saw her face change like a mask removed. She snapped at the young housemaid for leaving a window open, her tone sharp as broken glass. "Do you have any idea how much it costs to cool this house? Are you stupid or just careless?" The girl, maybe 19, stammered an apology and fled. Veronica turned to the cook and demanded to know why breakfast was late, why the coffee wasn't the imported blend, why everything in this house fell apart the moment she had to manage it alone. Daniel Victor stood among the orchids, soil under his fingernails, and felt ice spread through his chest. This wasn't stressful. This wasn't the pressure of running a household. This was something else entirely, something that had been hidden behind performance and careful timing. He carried his tools to the rose garden that wrapped around the east terrace, positioning himself near the large windows of the morning room. From behind a trellis heavy with climbing roses, he could see and hear without being noticed, just another laborer tending the grounds. On his second day, everything shifted. Victor was pruning dead blooms from the heritage roses when he heard Veronica's voice drifting from the gazebo 30 feet away. She was on her phone, her back to the house, her voice low and intense. "No, Gerard, I told you, the timeline hasn't changed. 3 more weeks until the wedding, then another month for the paperwork to clear. The Zurich account is ready. I've already moved 200,000 from the household fund. He doesn't even look at those statements." She laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. "He's so trusting, it's almost sad, like a child who still believes in fairy tales." Victor's pruning shears froze mid-cut. Gerard. He didn't know anyone named Gerard in Veronica's life. She told him she had no family, no serious relationships before him, that he and Lily were her whole world now. He forced himself to keep working, to keep his breathing steady, to remain invisible. Veronica continued, her voice drifting through the morning air. "Once we have power of attorney and the asset transfers, well, accidents happen, especially on yachts. The Mediterranean is beautiful but so dangerous." She paused, listening. "Of course, I can play the grieving widow. I've been playing a devoted fiancée for 6 months. How much harder can a widow be?" The shears slipped from Victor's hands and hit the soil with a soft thump. He bent to retrieve them, his mind racing. Asset transfers, power of attorney, accidents on yachts. The words arranged themselves into a picture so ugly he wanted to reject it outright, but the pieces fit too perfectly. This wasn't about love. This wasn't even about money in the way he'd feared, some gold digger marrying for wealth. This was about theft, about taking everything, and then he thought of Alina's car going off that cliff, the brake failure no mechanic could explain. The Mediterranean is beautiful, but so dangerous. He thought of his daughter, silent and terrified, and rage so pure it felt like fire flooded his veins. But he couldn't confront her, not yet, not without proof. So Daniel the gardener stood and returned to his roses, his face carefully neutral, while Victor Harrington began planning how to save his life. Over the next week, the mask slipped further. Victor witnessed cruelty that made him question everything he thought he knew about reading people, about trust, about his own judgment. On Wednesday afternoon, Lily accidentally knocked over a glass of grape juice in the formal living room. The purple liquid spread across the white silk sofa like a wound. Veronica, who'd been arranging flowers nearby, went very still. Then she moved, fast and vicious, grabbing Lily's thin arm hard enough to leave marks. Victor, trimming the hedges beneath the open window, heard every word. "You stupid, broken little thing," Veronica hissed, her face close to Lily's. "Do you know what that sofa cost? More than your precious toys, more than your therapy, more than your worth. You don't talk, you don't behave, you're just a burden everyone has to carry. Maybe you should be somewhere else, a special school far away where broken children go and no one has to look at them." Lily's face had gone white, her eyes huge and brimming with tears she wouldn't let fall. She stood rigid in Veronica's grip, silent as stone, as she'd been silent for 2 years. Victor's hands clenched around the hedge trimmers so tightly his knuckles went bone white. Every instinct screamed at him to crash through that window, to put himself between this woman and his daughter, to roar his identity and his fury. But he forced himself to stay still, to breathe, to think. Confrontation without evidence would accomplish nothing. Veronica would deny it, would say the gardener misheard, would twist it into something else. She'd played this game too well for too long. He needed proof. He needed the kind of evidence that couldn't be explained away. The breaking point came days later. Rosa, a housemaid who'd worked for the Harrington family for 15 years, was accused of stealing an emerald bracelet from Veronica's jewelry box. Victor watched from the garden as Veronica stood in the main foyer, the entire staff assembled, her voice ringing with righteous anger. "I trusted you all, and this is how I'm repaid: theft." In this house, Rosa, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes, wept and swore she'd taken nothing. Veronica was unmoved. "Pack your things and get out. I'll be generous and not call the police, but if I ever see you near this property again, that generosity ends." Rosa left in tears, her reputation destroyed, her references worthless now. Victor later found the bracelet himself, tucked behind a false panel in Veronica's closet when he was checking window locks. She'd hidden it herself, manufactured the whole crisis to create an atmosphere of suspicion and control. The staff now moved through the house like frightened ghosts, terrified of being next. But the most damning revelation came on a thick, humid evening when thunderstorms threatened at the edges of the sky. Victor was weeding near the garden pavilion, a pretty structure of white columns and lattice at the far end of the grounds, surrounded by lavender and jasmine. He heard voices and froze, concealed by the tall plants and the gathering darkness. Veronica emerged from the house with a man Victor had never seen before. Tall, handsome in a cold way, expensive suit, the kind of man who looked like he bought and sold lives for profit. "You're paranoid, Gerard," Veronica was saying as they settled onto the pavilion bench. "He suspects nothing. The man thinks I'm going to be Lily's new mother." She laughed bitterly, "as if I'd waste my life raising that damaged little ghost. The moment the accident is arranged and the dust settles, the girl goes to an institution. Switzerland has excellent ones, very discreet, very expensive, very permanent." Gerard lit a cigarette, the ember glowing in the twilight. "The documents are ready. Forged power of attorney, asset transfer authorizations. Your signatures are perfect copies. Once you're married and have legal standing, we move the major accounts offshore. Then the yacht trip, then the tragedy." The grieving widow inherits everything, sells the company to our friends in Singapore, and we disappear to the Caribbean with $2 billion and new identities. Veronica leaned against him, her voice soft and satisfied. Elena's crash was good practice. Break lines are easy if you know the right mechanic. Victor never even questioned it, just mourned his poor dead wife like the sentimental fool he is. Victor, crouched among the lavender, felt the world tilt and fracture. Elena, they'd murdered Elena. His wife hadn't died in an accident. She'd been killed, eliminated, and he'd never known. The grief he'd carried for 2 years was built on a lie, and the woman he'd almost married had orchestrated it all. His hands dug into the soil, his breathing shallow and silent, rage and horror warring inside him. But beneath both emotions, something colder and harder was forming, a plan. They thought him a fool. They thought him blind. Let them keep thinking that. Let them believe they'd won. He stayed frozen in the garden until they left, his clothes damp with evening dew, his mind cataloguing every word. When he finally returned to the small gardener's cottage where he was supposedly staying, he contacted his lawyer and a police captain he'd known for years, men he trusted absolutely. He explained everything, asked for surveillance, and asked for patience. "I need evidence that will stand up in court," he told them. "I need them caught red-handed, and I need my daughter protected." They agreed to wait, to watch, to let the trap close fully before springing it. Victor had one advantage Veronica didn't know about: Lily herself. It happened on a quiet, golden afternoon when Veronica had retreated to her suite for a nap, and the household staff were occupied with their duties. Victor was in the garden, planting marigolds along the stone path, bright, cheerful flowers that his mother had always loved. He heard light footsteps and looked up to see Lily walking toward him, her expression solemn, her small hands clutching her ever-present tablet. She stopped a few feet away, watching him work. Daniel Victor smiled gently, careful not to presume familiarity. "Hello, miss. Pretty day, isn't it?" She didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. Slowly, as if approaching a skittish animal, she came closer and sat on the grass beside him. Victor continued planting, talking softly about the flowers, the weather, the birds singing in the oak trees. And then Lily did something that stopped his heart. She opened her drawing app and began to sketch. When she finished, she turned the tablet toward him. The drawing was simple but clear: a tall man with flowers in his hands and kind eyes, and a small girl with brown braids standing beside him. Between them, she'd drawn a heart. And at the bottom, in careful letters, "I know, I always knew, thank you for coming back." Victor's vision blurred with tears. He set down his trowel and looked at his daughter, this brave, brilliant child who'd been silent for so long but whose eyes saw everything. "You knew," he whispered. She nodded solemnly. He wanted to ask how. Was it his walk, his voice, some instinct that went deeper than disguise? But it didn't matter. She knew. She'd kept his secret because she trusted him completely. He reached out slowly, and she took his hand. Her fingers were small and warm, and he realized this was the first time she'd willingly touched anyone since Elena died. "I'm going to fix everything," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "She'll never hurt you again, I swear it." Lily nodded again, her dark eyes fierce with something that looked like hope. She squeezed his hand once, then released it and stood, brushing grass from her dress. Before she walked back toward the house, she looked over her shoulder and mouthed 2 words. "Be careful." Victor watched her go, his heart both broken and mended at once. The alliance was sealed without spoken words, but it was stronger than any promise could have been. His daughter trusted him, and he would not fail her again. What Victor didn't know yet was that Lily had been waging her own quiet war. The tablet she carried everywhere, a gift from her father so she could communicate through text-to-speech since she wouldn't speak aloud, had become her weapon. She discovered that it could record video with a single swipe, and she'd been documenting everything. She recorded Veronica screaming at the cook because the chicken was too dry, too bland, too everything. She recorded Veronica standing in front of her bedroom mirror, practicing her concerned voice. "Oh, Victor, I'm so worried about Lily. Perhaps we should find a specialist boarding school where she can get intensive help." Then watching Veronica's face shift to cold satisfaction once she thought the performance was convincing enough. But the most important recording came late one night when Lily should have been sleeping. She'd heard voices downstairs and crept to the top of the grand staircase, tablet in hand, her small body concealed behind the heavy velvet curtains. Veronica and Gerard were in the study, door ajar, documents spread across Victor's desk. Lily pressed the record and held very still. The signatures look perfect, Gerard was saying, examining papers by lamplight. Once these are filed after the wedding, you'll have power of attorney over all personal accounts and medical decisions. If anything were to happen to Victor, tragic boating accident, sudden illness, you control everything, including what happens to the girl. Veronica traced a finger over a document, her smile predatory. She'll be in a Swiss institution before Victor's body is cold. They specialize in difficult children, the kind families want to forget about. Very discreet, very expensive, very permanent. No visits, no contact. She'll disappear. Just like Alina disappeared, Gerard added casually, pouring himself whiskey from Victor's decanter. Brake lines are easy if you know the right mechanic. Worked perfectly, single car accident, rainy night, tragic but believable. The police never suspected a thing. And they won't suspect anything when Victor's yacht has an unfortunate accident in international waters, Veronica agreed. Rich men die on boats all the time. Too much wine, rough seas, a fall overboard, so tragic, so profitable. They laughed together, the sound echoing through the quiet house. Lily's hands trembled around the tablet, but she kept recording, her thumb steady on the button. She didn't understand everything they were saying. Words like power of attorney and offshore accounts were too big, too adult. But she understood enough. They'd hurt Mommy, they wanted to hurt Daddy, they wanted to send her away forever. When they finally left the study, Lily fled back to her room on silent feet and locked her door. She watched the video 3 times, tears streaming down her face, then saved it behind a password only she would know. Her mother's birthday, the date that had ended her voice, but not her courage. She saved other videos too, a folder full of evidence, hidden in plain sight on a device everyone assumed was just a communication tool for a disabled child. Margaret, the sharp-eyed housekeeper, noticed the change in Lily, the way she clutched that tablet like a lifeline, the way she'd peek around corners before entering rooms, the careful way she positioned herself to capture conversations. The old woman said nothing directly, but she mentioned to Daniel one morning while he was hauling mulch that the little one is gathering ammunition. Her eyes met Victor's, knowing and fierce. She's her father's daughter, brave and smart. But she'll need help when the time comes. She'll have it, Victor promised. We all will. The days ticked down toward the engagement party, Veronica's grand celebration, her public triumph. But the mansion hummed with a different energy now, a coiled tension like a storm about to break. Veronica felt it and grew paranoid. She noticed the gardener seemed to linger near windows, to watch too intently for a man who was supposed to be pruning roses. She noticed Lily had stopped cowering and hiding. There was something new in the child's silent stare, a defiance that made Veronica uneasy. 4 days before the party, Veronica made her move. She waited until Lily was asleep, then slipped into the girl's room with a master key. She searched methodically, drawers, closet, toy chest, until she found the tablet on the nightstand. She grabbed it and tried to open it, but the screen demanded a password. She tried Victor's birthday. Wrong, her own birthday. Wrong, Lily's birthday. Wrong, fury rose in her throat. What was this child hiding? The next morning, she confronted Lily in the breakfast room, the rest of the house still quiet. She grabbed the girl by both shoulders, fingers digging in, and hissed close to her face. What's on this tablet? What's the password? Tell me. Now Lily's eyes went wide with fear, but her lips stayed pressed together. She would not speak, could not speak. Veronica shook her. You little, the door slammed open. Daniel the gardener stood there, his face transformed by rage he could no longer contain. Let her go. His voice wasn't humble anymore. It wasn't the voice of hired help. It was the voice of a man who commanded boardrooms and built empires. Let her go. Veronica released Lily in shock, stepping back. How dare you, you're fired. Get off this property before I call the police and have you arrested for assault. Margaret appeared behind Daniel, her elderly frame somehow formidable. He's needed for the engagement party preparations. He stays until after the event. Those were your own orders, Miss Crane. The plants, the lighting, the garden setup. Surely you don't want to cancel all that work 3 days before your big celebration. Veronica's eyes darted between the gardener, the housekeeper, and the child. Something was wrong, the pieces didn't fit, but she couldn't identify the threat. Finally, she waved a hand dismissively. Fine, but you, she pointed at Daniel, stay outside, don't come into the main house again. And you, she turned to Lily, you're confined to your room until the party. Margaret will bring your meals. Maybe isolation will teach you some respect. She swept from the room, taking the locked tablet with her. Victor wanted to go after her to end this charade now, but Margaret's hand on his arm stopped him. 2 more days, she whispered. She doesn't know we've already copied everything. Let her think she's won. That night, Victor reviewed his plan with his lawyer and the police captain. Every video from Lily's tablet had been copied to secure drives and uploaded to encrypted servers. Audio analysis confirmed Veronica's and Gerard's voices. A forensic accountant had traced $200,000 from Harrington household accounts to an offshore account in Veronica's name. And most damning of all, they'd found the mechanic, a man with a criminal record who, when offered immunity, admitted Gerard had paid him to sabotage Elena Harrington's car 2 years ago. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and ready. The engagement party would become a reckoning. The night before the storm, the mansion buzzed with controlled chaos, caterers testing the sound system, florists arranging massive displays of white orchids and roses, staff polishing silver until it gleamed. The activity provided perfect cover. Near midnight, when Veronica was in the guest wing reviewing seating charts with the event coordinator, Victor slipped through the servants' corridor and up the back stairs to the 2nd floor. He moved like a shadow through his own home, silent and sure. Lily's door was locked from the outside. Veronica had made good on her threat of confinement, but Margaret had provided Victor with the master key. He unlocked it silently and stepped into the dark room. Lily was sitting up in bed, moonlight streaming through her window, her eyes bright and alert. She'd been waiting for him. She pointed to the window, then held up a small piece of paper. Victor crossed to her and took it. In Lily's careful handwriting, tablet in her nightstand drawer. Password is Mommy's birthday. 0 to 8 to 1 to 5. Victor's throat tightened. August 15th. Elena's birthday. Their daughter had locked her evidence behind her mother's memory, a final protection. He squeezed Lily's hand once, then slipped back into the corridor and made his way to the master's suite. The rooms he used to share with Elena, that Veronica had redecorated in creams and golds. He moved through Veronica's space quickly, his hands steady despite the rage simmering beneath his skin. The tablet was exactly where Lily said it would be. He entered the password, 0815, and the device unlocked. The folder labeled Truth contained 14 video files. He connected a data cable and copied everything to a secure drive in less than 3 minutes, then uploaded copies to his lawyer's server and the police captain's secure evidence system. When he returned the tablet to the drawer, it looked untouched. Veronica would never know it had been accessed. His final stop was Lily's room. She'd moved to the window, and when he appeared below in the garden, she opened it carefully. The summer air was soft and warm between them. Victor reached up, she reached down. Their hands met through the open window, father and daughter separated by walls and lies, but connected by something unbreakable. Tomorrow, everything changes, he whispered. It's going to be scary, but you have to be brave just a little longer. Can you do that? Lily nodded, her small face solemn and determined. She touched her hand to her heart, then pointed at him, the gesture that meant, I love you in their private language. Victor returned it, his eyes burning with unshed tears. You saved us, he told her. You saved us both. She didn't smile. Smiling still seemed too far away, too much to ask of a child who'd been through so much. But she nodded again, acknowledging what she'd done, accepting her role in the battle to come. Then she carefully closed the window and retreated into her room. Victor stood in the garden for a long moment, looking up at his home, the mansion he'd built with his own hands and sweat, that had been invaded and corrupted, that tomorrow he would reclaim. Above him, stars wheeled in the summer sky, and somewhere in the house, a monster slept peacefully, dreaming of wealth and murder, and getting away with all of it. Victor allowed himself a cold smile. Morning would bring enlightenment, the brutal, inescapable kind. The Harrington ballroom had been transformed into something from a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers reflecting light onto polished marble floors, towering arrangements of white flowers everywhere, champagne fountains bubbling, a string quartet playing softly in the corner. 200 guests filled the space, business magnates in Italian suits, socialites in designer gowns, politicians who smiled for cameras. It was the kind of party that would be featured in society pages, that would cement Veronica Crane's position in the upper echelons of wealth and power. Veronica herself was radiant, her gown a shimmering column of ice blue silk, diamonds at her throat and wrists. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting compliments, laughing at jokes, playing the role of devoted fiancée so perfectly that even people who'd known Victor for decades believed it. She explained his absence smoothly. Victor's helicopter was delayed by weather. You know how he hates to miss even a minute of work. He'll be here soon, and then we'll make the official announcement. It was a lie. Victor Harrington was exactly where he needed to be, near the service entrance. Among the catering staff and extra waiters hired for the evening stood a man in worn work clothes and a maintenance cap. No one looked at him twice. Invisible. Margaret stood nearby, her elderly hands folded calmly, but her eyes were sharp. In her ear was a tiny communication device connecting her to the police officers stationed discreetly around the property, and to the lawyer who sat in an unmarked car outside the gates, ready to present evidence the moment the trap was sprung. The plan was simple. At precisely 8:15 p.m., Elena's birthday digits, a time Lily had chosen herself, the main display screen would activate. Margaret would lock all exits, and the truth would flood into that glittering space like poison into a wound. At 8:10, Victor saw Veronica step onto the small stage the event coordinator had set up near the grand fireplace. She tapped a microphone, and the crowd quieted, turning expectantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for celebrating with us tonight. Victor would be so touched by your presence. While we wait for him to arrive, I thought I'd share a few words about the wonderful journey we've been on." She spoke about love and second chances, about how she'd fallen for Victor's kindness, his brilliant mind, his devotion to his daughter. She talked about how excited she was to become Lily's new mother, to give that poor silent child the nurturing she so desperately needed. The crowd murmured approval. Several women dabbed at their eyes. Victor felt his jaw clench. The performance was flawless. If he hadn't seen the truth with his own eyes, even he might have believed it. 8:14, Margaret nodded to him across the room. The police officers moved subtly toward the exits. The lawyer's voice crackled in Margaret's earpiece. "Ready on your signal." 8:15. The lights dimmed slightly, a programmed effect for what should have been a romantic engagement video. The massive display screen behind Veronica flickered to life. She turned to look at it, her smile expectant, assuming the event coordinator had prepared some montage of photos. Instead, her own face appeared on the screen, contorted with rage. Her voice boomed through the ballroom speakers. "You stupid, broken little thing. You don't talk, you don't behave. You're just a burden everyone has to carry." The crowd gasped. Veronica's smile froze, confusion flashing across her features. On screen, the video continued, Veronica grabbing Lily's thin arm, shaking her, calling her worthless. Then the image cut to another clip. Veronica in the garden gazebo, her voice cold and calculating. "The timeline hasn't changed. The Zurich account is ready. He's so trusting, it's almost sad." Murmurs rippled through the ballroom, growing louder. People pulled out phones, started recording. Veronica stepped back from the microphone, her face going pale. "Turn it off. This is someone turn it off." But the videos kept playing. Gerard's voice joined Veronica's on the recording. Forged power of attorney, asset transfers, Once you're married and have legal standing, we move the major accounts offshore. Then the yacht trip, then the tragedy. The crowd's murmurs turned to shouts of shock and confusion. And then came the most damning clip of all, Veronica and Gerard in Victor's study speaking casually about murder. Elena's crash was good practice. Brake lines are easy if you know the right mechanic. Veronica's recorded laugh echoed through the ballroom. Victor will have an unfortunate accident in international waters. Rich men die on boats all the time. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Someone screamed. Guests backed away from Veronica as if she carried disease. She stood frozen on the stage, her face a mask of horror, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Then she recovered, grabbing the microphone with shaking hands. "This is fake, doctored. Someone is trying to sabotage me. It's manipulation, lies, digital forgery." A man's voice cut through the chaos, clear and commanding. "It's not fake, Veronica. Every word is real, verified, and already in the hands of the police." Victor Harrington stepped out from the service corridor, removing his maintenance cap, his disguise falling away like shed skin. He stood tall, his presence filling the room in a way no costume could diminish. The crowd recognized him immediately, shocked whispers his name like a wave. He walked toward the stage, and the crowd parted before him like water. His eyes never left Veronica's face. She stared at him as if seeing a ghost, all color draining from her features. "Victor, but you were in Scandinavia." "I was here," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite its gentleness. "I've been here for 3 weeks, watching everything, hearing everything. I know what you did to Elena. I know what you planned to do to me and my daughter, and everyone here now knows it too." Gerard, who'd been standing near the champagne fountain, made a sudden break for the terrace doors. 2 police officers stepped into his path, their badges visible now, their handcuffs already out. He froze, panic flashing across his face, then tried to run in the opposite direction. More officers blocked his escape. Within seconds, he was restrained, his expensive suit rumpled, his composure shattered. Veronica backed away from Victor, shaking her head frantically. "You can't prove anything. Those videos could be edited, faked with AI, anything. You have no real evidence." Victor's lawyer stepped onto the stage beside him, a slim leather folder in his hands. "We have bank records showing $200,000 transferred from Harrington household accounts to an offshore account in your name. We have forensic analysis confirming your voice on the recordings. We have forged documents with your fingerprints. And we have a confession from the mechanic Gerard hired to sabotage Elena Harrington's car, a confession given in exchange for immunity and already submitted to the district attorney." The lawyer opened the folder, displaying documents for the crowd to see. Guests craned their necks, phones still recording, the scandal of the decade unfolding in real time before them. Veronica's face twisted, rage replacing the shock. "You self-righteous bastard," she hissed at Victor, all pretense of gentility gone. "You think you're so noble, so superior? You're just a mark, an easy target, a fool who fell for a performance. Elena was weak, you're weak, and that mute little brat." She lunged toward him, fingers curled like claws, but police officers were already there, pulling her back, forcing her arms behind her. She fought against them, screaming obscenities, her beautiful gown tearing, her carefully styled hair falling into her face. "You'll never make it stick. I'll get the best lawyers. I'll destroy you in court." Victor watched her without expression, but his voice when he spoke held a weight that silenced even her fury. "You murdered my wife. You terrorized my child. You tried to steal everything I built and erase my family like we were nothing. The evidence is overwhelming, irrefutable, and already submitted to authorities. Justice isn't negotiable." Veronica was dragged toward the exit, still screaming threats and denials. Gerard was led out in handcuffs, his head down, his fight already gone. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the 2 conspirators were removed from the mansion. Police cars waiting outside, with lights flashing red and blue against the elegant facade. When the doors closed behind them, the ballroom remained frozen for a long moment. Then Victor turned to face his guests, colleagues, friends, society figures who'd come to celebrate a lie. His voice was steady but laced with exhaustion. I apologize for the disruption to what should have been a joyful evening. The truth, however, couldn't wait any longer. Thank you for bearing witness. Your presence here tonight ensures that what happened will be documented, public, and impossible to bury." He stepped off the stage and walked toward the grand staircase. The crowd parted again, whispers following him, phones still recording, but Victor barely heard them. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, down the hallway to Lily's room, and opened the door. She was sitting on her bed in her pajamas, Margaret beside her, holding her hand. The old housekeeper had brought her down briefly to see the screen activate, to see her videos play for all the world, before taking her back upstairs, away from the chaos. Lily's eyes met her father's, wide and questioning. Victor crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, his formal clothes incongruous, his face exhausted but peaceful. "It's over," he told her softly. "She's gone. Gerard's gone. The police have them. You're safe now. We're both safe." Lily stared at him for a long moment, processing. Then her small face crumpled and she threw her arms around his neck, sobbing silent sobs that shook her whole body. Victor held her tight, his own tears finally falling, 2 years of grief and fear and rage pouring out in that embrace. Margaret wept quietly beside them, her weathered hand resting on Lily's back. They stayed that way for a long time, the sounds of the dispersing party fading below them, the mansion slowly emptying of strangers and returning to the family that owned it. Days blurred together after that night, police interviews, lawyer meetings, news vans camped outside the gates. The story exploded across the media. Billionaire catches his fiancée in murder plot using hidden camera footage captured by his silent daughter. It was sensational, tragic, the kind of story that dominated headlines for weeks. Victor issued one brief public statement thanking law enforcement and asking for privacy as his family healed. Then he closed the gates and shut out the world. A week after the party, on a quiet morning when the news vans had finally left and the household had fallen into an exhausted peace, Victor and Lily sat together in the garden, their garden where everything had started. The roses he'd planted, as Daniel, were blooming in full glory, red and pink and white against the green hedges. Margaret brought them tea and small pastries, her eyes still damp every time she looked at them, relief and joy mixing with the grief of all they'd endured. Victor was telling Lily about the foundation he planned to create in Alina's name, a fund for children who'd lost parents, for trauma therapy and support services, for research into selective mutism and childhood grief. "Your mom would want something good to come from all this pain," he said softly. "She'd want other kids to have help, to have people who understand." Lily listened intently, her hands wrapped around her teacup. She'd been quiet since the party, not fearful anymore, but processing, healing slowly like a plant recovering from frost. Victor didn't push her to speak. He'd learned that silence could hold its own kind of communication, its own strength. But then Lily set down her cup carefully and looked at him with those dark, serious eyes. She opened her mouth, and her voice, unused for 2 years, rough and small but unmistakably present, shaped a single word: "Daddy." Victor froze. Time seemed to stop. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling instantly. Victor felt his heart crack open, something enormous and overwhelming flooding through him. "Lily," his voice broke on her name. She tried again, the words coming slowly, painfully, but coming. "I knew it was you. In the garden, I always knew. You came back." Tears streamed down her face, but she kept talking, each word a victory. "You saved me. You saved us." Victor pulled her into his arms, his whole body shaking with sobs. "You saved us," he whispered into her hair. "You were so brave. You were the bravest person I've ever known. Your mom would be so proud of you." They held each other while Margaret wept openly, while the morning sun climbed higher and bathed the garden in golden light, while 2 years of silence finally, blessedly broke. 6 months passed. Spring arrived again, and with it, transformation. The Harrington mansion, once a place of shadows and fear, filled with light and laughter. Veronica and Gerard were convicted on multiple charges: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, attempted theft, and in Gerard's case, first-degree murder for Alina's death. The trials were public and brutal, but Victor and Lily didn't attend. They'd given their depositions, submitted their evidence, and chosen to focus on healing rather than revenge. Justice moved forward without them. The foundation in Elena's name launched with a gala that raised $3 million in a single night. The funds supported children's grief counseling, research into trauma-induced mutism, and legal advocacy for vulnerable families. Victor threw himself into the work, finding purpose in turning his family's tragedy into protection for others. Margaret was given the guest cottage permanently, with a generous pension and the official title of honorary grandmother. She spent her days helping run the household, baking cookies with Lily, and sitting in the garden with her knitting, the peace on her face proof that loyalty and love had finally been rewarded. And Lily bloomed like the roses her father had planted. She spoke more each week, her voice growing stronger, though she still had days when words felt too heavy and silence was easier. Victor never pushed. He learned to read her expressions, her gestures, the language of a child who'd learned early that sometimes survival meant staying quiet, but who was learning now that her voice mattered, that she was heard, that she was safe. On the anniversary of Elena's death, a date that had once been marked only by grief, they planted a tree in the garden together, a flowering cherry that would bloom every spring. Lily placed a stone at its base with a simple inscription. "For Mom, we remember, we keep going." That evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and gold, Victor and Lily sat on the bench beneath the new tree. She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content in a way that would have seemed impossible a year ago. "Daddy," her voice was soft but clear. "Yes, sweetheart. Are we safe now, really safe?" He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Yes, really, truly safe. No one will hurt you again. I promise." She was quiet for a moment, thinking then, "Mommy would be happy we're okay." "She would," Victor agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "She'd be so happy. And so proud of you." The garden around them was in full bloom, roses and marigolds, and the bright new flowers of spring, everything Victor had planted during those weeks when he'd been invisible, when he'd been nothing but a gardener watching his world crumble and preparing to fight back. Now those flowers represented something else: renewal, persistence, the truth that even when things are torn down, they can grow again. Lily tilted her head up to look at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. When she spoke again, her voice held a child's simple wisdom, the kind that cuts through complexity to reach what matters. Sometimes the people who seem small can do big things. Victor looked down at his daughter, this brave, brilliant, beautiful child who'd found her voice by first finding her courage, and smiled. Sometimes the smallest voices tell the truths the loudest people can't hear. She nodded solemnly, accepting this, adding it to the lessons she was building her new life upon. Then she leaned her head back against his shoulder and sighed, a sound of pure contentment. They sat together as night fell, as the mansion's windows glowed warm behind them, as the garden that had witnessed so much pain became a place of peace again. Father and daughter, survivors both, no longer alone in their silence, but choosing it together now, a comfortable quiet, the kind that speaks of safety, of home, of having finally found solid ground. In the darkness, fireflies began to drift through the flower beds, tiny lights dancing like promises, that truth endures, that love protects, that even the quietest souls can change the world. Sometimes the loudest truths come from the quietest voices, from a child who couldn't speak but found another way to be heard. What would you have done if you saw something wrong, but no one believed you could help? Justice comes in many forms, but it always begins with courage, no matter how small the person who carries it. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about bravery, redemption, and families fighting to protect each other.